This is the Welcome to Humanity podcast with thought leader and transformative psychiatrist, Dr. Fred Moss. This show focuses on the betterment of humanity on a global scale. Each episode will leave you enlightened, inspired, and ready to make an impact in your world. Welcome to the show. Welcome to your life. Welcome to humanity. Here's Dr. Fred.
Welcome to the Welcome to Humanity podcast. My name is Ryan Levesque, and I am the podcast producer for this show. And with me today, we have none other than the amazing Dr. Fred. Dr. Fred, welcome to your podcast.
Wow. It's really like technology has come a long way when you can be the guest on your own podcast. That's right.
Right. Well, thanks first of all for handing over the host chair to me once again. This is an honor I had on episode 0 before the podcast even officially launched, where I had a chance to play this role and have you as a guest on the show. And here we are. We've got 33 episodes released so far, a few months after the podcast launched. We thought it would be a good opportunity today to take a step back and look at Welcome to Humanity. Not just Welcome to Humanity, the podcast, but Welcome to Humanity, the brand, Welcome to Humanity, the company, but even more so, Welcome to Humanity, the ethos.
The ethos.
The philosophy that drives everything that you're doing, Dr. Fred, under the brand of this Welcome to Humanity umbrella, so to speak. Mm-hmm. So I'm excited to get into that with you. And I thought maybe before we touch on that, be interested to hear from you, looking back over the 33 episodes that we've released so far. What's been the highlight for you, or what's been the part of the experience that you've enjoyed the most?
Well, that's a good question. I really had no idea. You and I have talked about podcasts long before I even knew what a podcast was. When we first met, I just thought, well, that sounds like a good thing to do. What is it? And I really didn't know what a podcast was even right up until when we started this podcast series. When I look back on what I enjoyed the most, I think it's really just bringing out the best in all of my guests, and having my guests completely appreciate the interview when it's over. And then having listeners who just say that they love the interview, or that it moved them, or that, they can't wait till the next one, or that something in the interview was fabulous, or brought to mind something they had never thought of before. And for me, it's kind of shocking, because when I do these interviews, there's no effort, I remove effort out of the way. All I'm really doing is paying attention to my guest and paying attention to what they're up to, and then allowing them to speak to their extraordinary, but usually in some ways just their basic foundational humanity.
I wonder if you could say a little bit more about that. No effort, because it sounds like there is effort to pay attention and listen and to be on point. Can you just say a little bit more about what you mean by no effort?
Yes. It's funny, what I'm saying is there's no trying, there's no work. It's not uphill. It's actually like moving things out of the way so I can do what I love doing more than anything else in the world, which is being curious and listening and learning from the world around me. So, it's like easing into moving everything else out of the way, so that all I have left to do is listen, respond, and create, listen, respond, create, source, be curious, celebrate, listen, respond, create, etc. And that, even as I speak to this now, it would be a stretch for me to call that effort, or to call that trying, or to call that work. It's actually the essence of what is here for me to do in this lifetime. And so it's like, it's almost like saying, well, breathing is a lot of effort, because you actually have to, suck air into your lungs and then push it out. It's like, yeah, you have to do that. It's true. But if all I get to do is breathe, it sure is feel like we're in the most relaxed mode available in our existence. And so that's what this is for me. It's like listening, creating, learning, exploring, adventuring, asking, and then back to listening.
Yeah, I think to put it in words I've heard from you many times that I learned from you is, I think what you're pointing at is that it's a matter of a way of being. You just get on the show and be you with whoever the guest is before you. And that's what we all get to. We get the privilege of witnessing.
Well, that's really interesting too. So, going back when I like to call myself sort of a glorified childcare worker, and, going back to 1980 when I left University of Michigan for the second time as an undergraduate, with a pledge that I was never going to return to college. Of course, that didn't happen quite like that. But when I got my job as a childcare worker, what I began to learn is that I was most effective if I was just me. I didn't have to be like the other childcare worker. I didn't have to show up with a certain agenda. What I had to do was show up as much me as possible. And not only would the children around me sort of find healing in those particular encounters or days, or maybe even, something could occur that would alter lives, but that would happen to me as well. So the more that I'm me with someone, the more I'm authentically me, the more my job was rewarding. And then back to the same thing, Ryan, where it was easy to go to work. It was easy to go to work because all I had to do was be me. And, and from there, some magical effectiveness seemed to sprout.
So, Dr. Fred, you're starting actually, not even consciously, but you're actually starting, I think, to get up to the edges of Welcome to Humanity, even just in that last comment. Mm-hmm. But before we go there, I want to ask also, listeners have, for 33 episodes now, been hearing you introduced as thought leader and transformational psychiatrist, Dr. Fred Moss. So maybe this would be a good chance to peel back just a little bit of, I'm just going to ask it this way. Who are you, Dr. Fred? I mean, like, really, who are you? Sound familiar?
Yeah, it does. So it's interesting. I don't think I would have called myself a thought leader or a transformational psychiatrist if I had to choose words. It's sort of how I get to introduce myself to others. So I don't really see myself as a thought leader. I even think it's kind of hilarious that this is considered thought leading. And yet I really believe that it is. In other words, it's sort of backing up into things that we already know as humans, that we knew as kids, that we lost, that we began to veil and create complexities where simplicity could have done just as well. As a thought leader, or even let's go back to the childcare worker experience. After about 2 or 3 years as a childcare worker, the thing that was most surprising and troubling to me was how physicians or doctors, psychiatrists who are on call at the facility that I was employed at were treating the kids. And I just saw that they weren't communicating with the kids. That wasn't their primary mode of addressing the children that we would call them for assistance on. So I, eventually got the bee in my bonnet enough to say that I'm going to just go back and use whatever skills and passion I have to become a doctor that does listen. Now, I need to tell you that choosing to listen and be with one's humanity as a way of healing, as in fact, prerequisite, if not like the only prerequisite for which healing can be sourced and occur, does not seem to me to be thought leader material. It seems to be at the essence of what it is to be a human being. And that, in fact, all of us know at some level that is what cures, that is what brings transformation, or that is what brings healing to another person. I mean, that's why we rush to bedsides, or that's why we check in on people who are ill, or people who are just not feeling well. And we do that because we know that being with another person and being with another person such that they feel that they have someone who's been with them is a source of, almost cure, but it's even beyond cure. It's a disappearance of whatever discomfort that was there prior to the Union. Mm-hmm. So the idea is, the whole idea of Welcome to Humanity, the whole idea of here is sort of like backing up into Welcome to Humanity rather than creating something new using some ultra high-tech breakthrough technology. Instead, what we're doing is really getting that maybe each and every one of us doesn't really have an inherent clue what our next step should or could be. And maybe none of us are truly any inherently more sick than another. And that the definitions get defined or get created around us so that each and every human being really just wants to be heard. That's really what's here. Even that person, Ryan, and even those people over there, and even the ones that we can barely tolerate or maybe can't tolerate. At the source of those human beings is someone who wants to be heard for how they're seeing the world or how they think they need to move forward. And in hearing someone, it is truly magical what can occur when someone experiences being heard. And I think we've seen that in the podcast. And I've seen that, time and time again, literally thousands or even tens of thousands of times in my practice over the 40 years, which is people just want to be connected with. They just want to be communicated with. And they just want to be heard. And then, in fact, they want to listen after being heard or along with being heard in the communication dyad. Mm. And that's all I'm riffing on, really. That's all that's really here. Like, it doesn't seem to me to be that transformational. It doesn't seem to me to be that thought leading to get to really what's at the source of all human interactions and maybe even all human purpose, which is to communicate and connect with other humans.
Mm. So yeah, we're like dancing right around and through it right now for sure. I think getting to some of the key points wrapped up in this ethos. Maybe in a way we could take another run at this, Dr. Fred. I've heard you say something before, something to the effect of the phrase, welcome to humanity, and saying that phrase to another human being can be or is a compassionate and caring response to nearly anything that other person is dealing with. And even as I hear that, to me, I think there's a way that could be misunderstood as, oh, that's what you're dealing with? Welcome to humanity, almost dismissive. But of course, that's the complete opposite of what you're saying. But can you maybe crack into that a little bit? Why is welcome to humanity, as you might say, such an incredibly compassionate response that you could give someone really struggling?
Well, yeah, when someone is really struggling, what's here to be had is that the human experience includes at its primary construction, at its primary constitution, periods of time, and sometimes even uncomfortably long periods of time of massive discomfort. And massive discomfort in the form of, whatever you want to call these words. Not everybody has the same definition of these words, like anxiousness or nervousness or fear or aimlessness or hopelessness or helplessness, or terror or insomnia or racing thoughts or confusion or frustration or panic. Like, these are words that have been laid out by the psychological system as being something that should be considered ill or wrong. And if those are in your space, then you're called afflicted or affected or defective, or in fact can be called quite easily mentally ill. Instead of declaring oneself as mentally ill, one could theoretically, and I say more than theoretically, actually realistically, embrace at some level the aspect of discomfort that one is experiencing as being a key and predictable and important part of the comprehensive experience of what it is to be human. Even though I'm in pain, or even though I am feeling afraid, or even nervous or depressed, or golly, maybe I'm even hearing this voice thing that some people call voices, or other people call the committee, other people call intuition, other people call chatter, other people call, there's this thing that can be called voices. Even though all of that's happening on any given moment, even though it's uncomfortable, you can get there's nothing wrong with you inherently. There's nothing inherently wrong with you. In fact, all of those experiences are shared periodically or ongoingly by each and every human on the planet. And hence, we come right there to the common denominator, welcome to humanity. And in that space, that's a space that can be, I think, seen as ultimately, embracingly supportive and compassionate.
What does that make available for someone if they get to that space of recognizing that despite what my psychiatrist, and of course you are a psychiatrist, you'd probably not be the one saying this, but what my other psychiatrist told me, that in fact, maybe there is nothing wrong with me. What difference does that make for me or for someone out there listening, hearing that?
Yeah. This is a really tricky issue. So I want to preface it with that, this is a little bit of a politically tinged issue. And this is an issue that I have to dance around very carefully. So I'm going to do my best in this interview to do that, which is, when people go, you and I have talked before, if you go to a barbershop enough times, you get a haircut. And it's the same thing holds true in mental health. If you show up at the mental health industry, if you show up with looking for mental health assistance, one of the first things that the clinician has to do is diagnose you, because if they're going to get paid by any third-party payer, you need to have a diagnosis. If you, in fact, turn in something that says no diagnosis to an insurance company, you won't get paid. So the idea here is you immediately have to make a statement that you have an affliction. This person who's in your office with you has an affliction that has them less than or different than normal or average. Now, that can be really welcome for some people because maybe they've been acting poorer than they're ideal. Maybe they've been screaming at their spouse, or maybe they've been not getting up out of bed, or missing work, or not hitting deadlines, or having trouble sleeping, or eating too much, or some other addiction, or behaving in a way that they're not proud of, or behaving in a way that was either violent or they got caught doing something that they thought they were doing secretly. And all of those things can occur. And by the way, each and every one of those are in all of us. So there's nothing there. There's no one out here who doesn't relate to a little bit of what I just said. No one, not a person. That's a welcome to humanity phenomena. So when that occurs and we want to disown our responsibility for the fools that we've been, or for the jerks that we've been, or for the misled humans, or for the deep and honest, painful mistakes that we've been making, one of the ways to relinquish, and I want to say this, this does in no ways, I'm not blaming people. I'm just saying that one of the ways to relieve that anxiety, or relieve that pain, relieve the need to really reflect on one's own behavior and realize that the mistakes we're making are part of being human, is to take on a diagnosis. And so people will often really welcome a diagnosis. They really do. I think it's the only subspecialty in all of medicine where people just welcome a diagnosis. And if you don't get one, they're going to go back to the next doctor and make sure they do get one. In medicine, it would seem like when you come for a checkup, what we want to hear is that we got a clean bill of health. In psychiatry, when you come to psychiatry and the psychiatrist says you have a clean bill of health, you go on to your next psychiatrist so you can find somebody who agrees with you that there's something wrong with you.
I mean, what's that all about? What's that? What's going on with that dynamic? I
think that dynamic is about really, in some ways, again, I'm just got to be so careful treading these waters.
Yeah.
In some ways, if I can learn that I have a condition that's not me, that's drawing me forward to behave, think, or be in a way that I am not very proud of, or I don't feel aligned with, then I just assume give that responsibility to this outside entity. So whether it's bipolar disorder, or narcissistic personality disorder, autistic spectrum disorder, post-traumatic stress disorder, generalized anxiety disorder, major depressive disorder, whatever disorder gets laid upon me. And some of those, I'm not saying that on the edges those things aren't useful or don't in fact engage some people in something that can move the needle forward. But once we take on those diagnoses, there's a relinquishment of responsibility for the areas of life that we've been having trouble with. And there's some deep relief in that. There really is. I fully understand. There's some completely deep relief in, oh my God, that's not me. That's my bipolar acting out. Or, oh my God, I can't believe I did that, but that has to be due to my post-traumatic stress disorder syndrome symptoms. And again, I can't underline enough here that life has incredible trauma associated with it each and every day. There's so much trauma going on this earth that, there's so many atrocities going on daily at this very moment on earth that I don't mean in any way to decrease the decrease the attention or the intensity that these kinds of experiences have on our daily being.
Yeah.
What I do mean to suggest, however, is that it's possible if one sees that as one's experience and doesn't fall prey to the notion that since one has been labeled a diagnosis, that there's sort of, that's an area of their life that they don't have as much access to as if they didn't have a diagnosis there. That's when there's something that can be adjusted. And I think that's the ethos that Welcome to Humanity points to, is embracing each and every experience as possibly just being a core part of being human, rather than being something that I'm afflicted with that I then have reduced access to managing.
I want to go back to something you said a couple moments ago, Dr. Fred. I wonder, is there something like a responsible handling of a diagnosis? And what I mean by that is trying to see if we can cut a level deeper here with this, because I know you feel strongly about understanding what's so in a situation, as opposed to just, putting on the blinders or pretending you don't know, that kind of thing. But is there a place where someone can take the information about a diagnosis, about maybe something that their doctor says is biologically going on here, so that they can then be responsible for it, as opposed to flee from it, so that they can then manage themselves, as opposed to giving up management of their life? What would you say to that?
Well, this whole idea of biological psychiatry got its, general roots in the 80s. There's some material that preceded the 80s, but for the most part, it got its birth while I was in medical school. So between 1984 and 1988 is when biological psychiatry really got its roots, and the advent of Prozac and everything that has happened since then. And now there's a general prevalent conversation that supports that the reason something's wrong with somebody, the reason that something is wrong with somebody, is that they have a biological imbalance that caused it. Yeah. And it's just understood that, what about the fact that, what about people who are biologically imbalanced, is a question I often am asked to field. Now, first of all, we don't know how to explain any of the inherent biological imbalances. We don't really have a really good access of what balance looks like. We really don't. We don't even know which chemicals we're measuring. We talk about serotonin, we talk about dopamine, we talk about norepinephrine, we talk about some of the hormones that we think are components that are related to mood or related to behavior. But the thing that we don't really know is about the cause and effect, that which comes first, or even, in fact, whether those are the actual items that are directly related to shifts in behavior, thought, or actions, behaviors or thoughts or speech, etc. Okay. So I think the space to go to here is, if you have a doctor who has said, well, you have a chemical imbalance, and frankly, chemical imbalances are truly for sure caused by, once we start adding chemicals to somebody's system, we have created an imbalance. I mean, naturally, we have done so intentionally to rebalance what we have determined as an imbalance. But after all, when we add a laboratory chemical to somebody's body, all intentions are to create an imbalance in order to rebalance. So measuring someone at that point is also fraught with a whole lot of uncertainty, because there are things that we're putting in our mouth, or can even expand that to things that we're seeing, or what we're hearing, or what we're reading, or even what we're smelling or taking in through our breath, that are truly toxins. And I think, going to the question of what you're saying, I think the best way to come at clients or coaches is to get that the experiences are unquestionable. Okay? Well, how life is being experienced, what is so with the experiences is unquestionable. But I immediately ask the people that I'm working with, the people that I coach, the people that I'm doing the transformational work, to stop right there and consider that there might be alternative explanations or alternative sources or alternative approaches that to this very moment they had never even thought of, that could address those experiences in ways that could lead them free of those experiences, rather than dealing with something that is now going to be expectable, chronic, repetitive, etc., which is what the present paradigm supports. And I'm suggesting by taking a really early, really high upstream, early approach to considering the possibility of another pathway for the experience, including the possibility that just with a little tweak, it could disappear forever. I know that seems impossible in the present prevailing conversation. I don't think it's impossible at all. And I've had a lot of experience with just altering the direction of how an experience is being metabolized and creating a different pathway that allows for freedom where freedom was thought to never be that freedom was really just something that was thought to be something from the past. And in fact, freedom is available with nearly all, if not all, psychological experiences that's what I'm using to start with, like a full and honest freedom from any and all psychological experiences minute by minute, so that our present minute is not in any way based on what has occurred to us in the past. Although we think it is, what I'm really saying is right in front of us, we have the possibility, as in our next thought, in our next action, in our next way of being, to be something different than we otherwise might have been to our default. So it's opening that up for my patients, or as you know, I don't call them patients much anymore. It's really my coachees or my clients is what's new here. And the success rate when we're able to loosen a jar that high, that early at the symptom level or at the experience level and take it down a new pathway, the success rate has been phenomenal, extraordinary. Just, things that we thought could never go away, or just watch them dissolve and give people back power where disempowerment had been residing.
Yeah. So I've got a two-part question. The first part, you just used a expression or metaphor of loosening the jar. Can you explain what you mean by that? It may not be apparent to all our listeners. And then I think where we could go from there, if you'd like to spin into it, is a little bit into like, what does your coaching model look like? Or what does the coaching experience look like? Of how you take someone from however they're coming into your office or your virtual office for the first time saying, hey, Dr. Fred, I've heard you're a, quote, non-diagnosing psychiatrist and that you might be able to do something here for me. Loosening the jar, and then let's talk non-diagnosing psychiatry, if you like.
Sure. So what I mean by loosening the jar is, I think we've all heard the phrase used as an analogy before, but in this case, what I'm saying is, the jar is very tight on some of these prevailing conversations about how psychological symptoms are explained. The prevailing conversation of what psychological symptoms are is supported by the actions that we then take, such as starting therapy or seeing a psychiatrist or taking medicine or, monthly visits or altering or adding or changing or increasing medications or cross referrals or CT scans and all those things, as if that's all we have. As if that's all we have. As if that's the only thing that's out there. It's the front edge, and there's no consideration really being given to things that are outside of that very limited, extremely, let's face it, a very limited approach to what we think are baseline psychological problems. So when I say loosening the jar, what I'm suggesting is that there is a whole host, nearly an infinite, in fact, theoretically, nearly an infinite amount of different approaches that we could use that are different than what we know are out there. I'm really asking to consider the possibility that just because that's what's being used doesn't mean that that's all that's available. And just because even you've never heard of it before doesn't mean that it won't be ultimately extraordinarily useful. So in Loosening the Jar, it's really the idea of giving up what people have told you up to now is supporting the notion that you're defective, that you're afflicted, that you're ill, that you have a deteriorating or chronic condition. And so that's what I mean by loosening jar, is getting that, wow, there might be additional possibilities out here that could, at the very core, rudimentary core, explain my experience in a way that will leave relief available in a much more efficient and perhaps much more rapid fashion than the prevailing conversation presently supports. So does that answer the loosening the jar enough, or do you want me to say a little more about that?
How about just this? What's the jar?
Mm-hmm. So I think the jar is the prevailing conversation. The jar is that there's a notion that we're on the cutting edge of how we handle mental health. Why would we? We're in the strongest and freest country in the history of the planet. Of course, that's up for grabs for a different podcast, but let's just say that we are in the strongest and freest and most technologically advanced state of all time. So one would suspect that the conversations we're having about mental health are as good as they've ever been, are as pointed as they've ever been. The conversation of what it means to be healthy, what it means to be normal, what it means to therefore be abnormal, and I'm saying again, the very limited number of approaches that are available here, high tech or low tech as they are only such a small part of what might be available to consider when taking on humans' uncomfortable experiences. So the jar really is the overwhelming, overarching nature of the impact that the prevailing conversation has on our psyche, on what we think, where we think mental illness arises from, and therefore where we think the treatments should be focused on. How about that?
Yeah, no, that's great. Thank you. Thank you. So then that leads into, what is non-diagnosing psychiatry, or what does it mean to be a non-diagnosing psychiatrist?
So I don't know, up until recently, and this is just a few weeks ago, I got onto Google and looked up non-diagnosing psychiatrist, and there isn't anyone. So we don't have a whole lot of definitions of what that is. And what I'm saying is that in my 40 years of experience, what I have realized is as soon as we give a diagnosis, which as we said earlier in this conversation, is the first thing that has to happen in order for a clinician to establish a clinical relationship with someone who wants to declare themselves as a patient, is a diagnosis has to be given. And that creates a power gradient immediately. That creates I need something that you have, or I need something from, there's a power gradient that is no longer lateral human to human. Now, at the very, I get it. Sometimes it's really comfortable. Sometimes it's even very useful. Sometimes therapeutic advances take place that are extraordinary inside of those clinical dyads. And I don't mean to minimize any of that. If what people are doing is working for them, by no means should they shift from whatever they're doing. Let's make that very clear. I'm not trying to defunct anything that's being done that's useful. By all means, if it's whatever you're doing, if it's useful, if you feel like that's as good as you want it to be, or that's as good as it's going to get, and you don't even want to explore anything new, and you're happy with the way things are going, then you should just keep doing that. And I really mean that. No disrespect at all for something you're doing that's working to have your life be optimized. On the other hand, what we have here, what I think I noticed, for a while there, I was starting to think that maybe medicines were a primary problem, and they kind of are, but it's a different question now, that medicines were somehow causing or at least perpetuating the symptoms that they're marketed to treat, and that, the bad guys would be the big pharma, or, it's a nice name that everybody knows, or the insurance companies, or the medical industrial complex. And because they serve up these medicines. But It turns out as we back off of that, we start seeing that, well, serving them up doesn't mean you have to eat them after all. I mean, somebody's putting those in, now that's not true across the board, Ryan. There are situations, especially behind closed doors in the, in involuntary confinements where in fact you are getting medicine against your will. But for the most, and that's a whole different discussion. And my goodness.
Yeah.
That lights me up deeply.
Yeah.
But if we're not looking at that, we're looking at the other 97% of the population who are taking medicine on their own and then blaming medicine for causing the problem. Now, not all 97 are blaming medicine for causing the problem. Many think that medicine is actually getting them what they need as best as they can hope for. Now, here's the thing. I used to think that medicine was the culprit, but as I looked a little further at that, I started seeing that the original trauma happens at the diagnosis. That what if when you came in, what we really had for you was welcome to humanity. What we really had for you is that you're not diagnosed. What we really had for you is there's nothing inherently wrong with you. We are sharing a human experience here together. And neither of us, and in fact, nobody, no matter how much they try, can tell you that they know what the next step is to take exactly. We do our very best to establish that. And each and every one of us go through these highly uncomfortable experiences that we've listed before. So there's something really warm, there's something really available for clients who are either tired of the conventional system not working as well as they would want it to, or people who want to avoid going into the conventional system at all for fear that it won't work as well as they would hope for. And there we're really looking across the table eye to eye, not as diagnoser to diagnosee, but as human to human, sharing a human experience together. And it is in that union and is in that diet where I find that the purest and the most effective and, in fact, the most permanent and sustainable healing conversations can occur. And that is eye to eye across the table or, across Zoom, I guess is another way here, across the virtual platforms, really getting that we share our humanity together. And so what's so special about what Welcome to Humanity is? Well, Welcome to Humanity is really the release of the notion that there's something wrong. And starting from there, the possibility of having power where power had already been relinquished, or having a capacity to go in directions that were otherwise thought to be impossible or unavailable based on a previous diagnosis. Like the possibility of really getting that all we are doing together here is being one piece of a 7 billion piece jigsaw puzzle, and that each and every one of us are equally, maybe not equally. It's hard to use the word entirely equally because certainly inequality is at the core of so many problems on the planet, but that each one of us are equally human. Let's put it that way. We are equally people. And I think nobody can argue that.
Yeah. I've heard you talk about Welcome to Humanity over the years. I've heard you point to this almost open door. I mean, after all, the word welcome is right in the phrase, right in the name, that it is all embracing for all people, even the ones, as I've heard you say, that we know are beyond the pale. And, well, that one he's, hearing voices and thinks the FBI's out to get him or whatever. Or on the other end of the spectrum, I mean, something for you, if as an American citizen, an Israeli citizen, a Jewish man, someone who is, for example, a KKK member, a white supremacist, a neo-Nazi, like, where's their seat at the table? Or, but really, I mean, what does Welcome to Humanity have to say or to offer to even someone who hates you, Dr. Fred, because you're Jewish?
Yeah, that's a great question. Look, I don't have to like them. I can even really dislike them. But, I can even, in my darkest moments, wish harm on people who are causing harm to others, or wish for their demise even. As a human, I can wish for the disappearance of humans that are causing harm to others or causing harm to my people, which really one could say that my people include the tribe of 7.8 billion humans on the planet. And when it's my brothers who are causing harm, you see, when I start getting to that it's my family here is 7.8 billion people deep, then it's my brothers causing troubles to my other brothers, or my brothers causing troubles to my sisters. And that's a whole different dynamic rather than them out there causing trouble to us over here.
Yeah.
So as we open up humanity to be what do they call it? Like a club, a distinctive club of 7.8 billion members, then we start seeing that we are all we. Like we are all we. There is no them over there that deserves to sit at the back of the bus. Yeah. There is no them over there that needs to be disregarded. There is this infighting inside of the family, perhaps, and some of it very damaging. And it's a whole different perspective to launch from when I get that we are them, like we are the them. And, you know, in the article that we wrote a couple of years ago that I wrote, you know, the Global Madness article, really speaking to how big does the threat have to be out there to get the 7.8 billion people to realize that we better function as one in order to survive? Theoretically, we looked at a Martian invasion in that particular article as a impactful blow that would force humanity to act as one in order to save the entire planet. And as you can recall, it's not entirely certain that we could create something so large that 7.8 billion people would decide we better work together. No kidding. Let's set aside our differences.
Yeah.
But that's what's here to be had in at least what then I guess Ryan starts looking like a thought leader. It does start looking like a transformational psychiatrist. If what I'm saying is there is no inherent them over there. There isn't. There's no inherent them over there. There just isn't. That's a linguistic phenomenon that we have created. There is only an us. And when we start getting that, it is welcome to humanity, or maybe said another way, welcome to the human family.
Yeah.
Just being a neo-Nazi in and of itself is only a human experience of a person who really, more than anything, Ryan, I'm quite convinced just wants to be heard. Just wants to be heard for what they see and what they know is the right thing to do, for given the perspective and the occurrence of how the world is for them.
Yeah.
So there's something that they know and they're committed to on how the world could be a better space. And the way that they've been taught, or the way that they see, or the way that they think now is consistent with really wanting to be heard loud and clear for what it is they have to say. And that's a welcome to humanity issue right there. I just think that each and every one.
Word you used earlier, too, is trauma. I wonder what traumas may lead someone to come to that conclusion. And I think even asking that question, again, I know this is really challenging for people to hear, but even asking that question then starts to open up just the tiniest sliver of the possibility of compassion for someone whose ideas seem, probably to most of us listening, just so intolerable.
I think you know that I've been reading 1984 by George Orwell. And in these troubling times, I do recommend that book, but it's not for the faint of heart. I used to say the same thing about Reservoir Dogs as a movie. Like, it's not everybody who should watch that movie, but if you think you should, then you definitely should. George Orwell's 1984 is a way another level up, way beyond Reservoir Dogs. I've never read anything written by a human that is so impactful. What's so interesting about that book is there's several different sections of human stratification that takes place naturally in that book. The inner party and the outer party and the proletariats, etc. In his writing, I find myself being compassionate with every single level. Every single level. I see how that got to be the way, including the hateable ones, including the super violent ones, including those who have no reason to continue living, including all those people. It's like, wow. It's so interesting that I can relate to all of that. And I think that's what we're really pointing to in Welcome to Humanity is, in fact, if we open up our own minds and our own heart, we can relate to everybody. We see what is so like intolerable in that person is really a part of us that we're not going to, we're not willing to pay attention to, or we're not willing to look square down the barrel at. Not saying that I am a neo-Nazi at heart, but I am saying that if I listened, I could learn something about why that got to be the way it is and resonate with that person enough to at least confirm a sense that they could be heard. Now, I'm not sure I can do that with everyone, Ryan. I mean, I get triggered just like every other human. Welcome to humanity, And it's something to strive for, and it creates the possibility of breakthroughs that otherwise won't be broken through if the jar isn't loosened.
Yeah. Wow. Well, as we begin to taper down here, as I often hear you say on the episodes, I want to switch back to the podcast for a second, or maybe not so much the podcast, but something that I've heard you say and talk about on the podcast. And that is the opportunity to explore the extraordinary nature of humanity, or explore what it means to be human and why humans are extraordinary or remarkable, or whatever adjective you want to use. But I wonder if you could say a little bit more about that. What is it about humanity that you find extraordinary? And if you care to, how does the show, in your view, illustrate that?
Well, okay. So let's see. Let's see if we could take this piecemeal and make some sense out of this question and create an answer worthwhile. Like an easy answer is, okay, Ryan, can you tell me what part of humanity isn't extraordinary? And, we could really start from that.
Earwax.
Okay, but it turns out that earwax is beyond extraordinary.
Right.
Like it is. And it's funny. I had a story about earwax just a half a day ago. I'm lying down here on my bed and I take out my hearing aid and I put it on my glasses, right? So that I know where it is and I won't lose it. And I wake up a half an hour later and it's gone. And I'm like, what the hell happened here? And of course, my cats love earwax. So my cat had taken my hearing aid and had licked the earwax out of it and moved my hearing aid like six feet away. I don't know that they licked the whole, you get my point. So anyways, maybe that's not what my listeners were hoping at the edge of their seat, wondering about extraordinary humanity. I'm not sure that story actually gets it, but... We'll try to get back online here. So really, what isn't extraordinary about humans is really a great question to start from. And anything that we would think is ordinary is also extraordinary that we would think anything was ordinary. Like, where do we get off thinking that things are just, just like, okay, the way they are, or ordinary or expectable, or that's just the way it's like each and every second from the moment we arrived here is a flat out miracle. And it's really, really just getting that. Like, what makes you think it isn't? What makes anyone think that it isn't? All right. Now, but digging a little bit deeper, I think what we really get is in our imagination and in our creativity, in our capacity to take in the world around us and to make judgments, assessments, or, and make evaluations or decide what to do, or maybe not to do anything, in our ability to love, in our ability to eat, in our ability to play, our ability to think and share, in our ability to speak and listen, in our ability to dance or sing or draw or cook or write, in our ability to make a difference with what comes out of our mouth or what comes off of our body, in how we look or what items we invent or we create, in our ability to destroy the world. Like really, in 1 second, I think we all know, in 1 second, that guy over there could destroy the world. We already know that. The whole world, the whole earth, kaboom, done.
Yeah.
1 second. Wow. And that we continue to wake up, that we continue to explore what is God, what is spirituality, what is health, what is vision. Or, that now and we could look immediately at technology. A lot of people point to that when we talk about, technology is growing at a rate that's exponentially faster than what it was growing even a decade ago. Okay, that's interesting and that's extraordinary. And that's only a very small piece of what's here, because then we start looking at alternative consciousnesses. All of those are extraordinary. Anybody who's explored even a little bit of that or wonders about exploring that, what is it like to live on a different astral plane? Or what about our history, or what about our future? Or what is this thing called now anyways? And how about mathematics? And how about physics? Or how about, quantum physics, a new level, or creation of everything from the atomic bomb to the hydrogen bomb. And then all of a sudden, even what little I know of artificial intelligence, or, 3D printers on the way there, or, robots, or, and then we get to read William Shakespeare, or we get to read the Torah or the Bible, like what amazing things that those are. There's the stories, the fables, the parenthood. What is it to be a parent, or what is it to love animals, or what is it to travel around the world to remote areas? What is it to speak across cultures? What is it to speak across cultures when neither of you understand the language coming out of each other's mouth, but love can still be found? Or what is it to really, really, really just stand right here in your humanity and realize that everything I just listed, you have an idea about? How is that not the essence of extraordinary humanity?
Wow. Wow. Dr. Fred, you just mentioned speaking across cultures, and I want to say a word about that. After I do, I'd like to invite you to just think, and what I'm going to share with you in a moment is going to help you to get a sense of the scale of this. But think about our listening audience right now, and you, more than anyone, know all of the things people could be dealing with right now, whether it's suicidal thoughts, the loss of a spouse, the loss of a child, loss of a job, hunger, homelessness. I mean, there's so many things we could go on and on.
Trafficking, war, torture, all sorts of horrible things, for sure.
Exactly. Yeah. So I'd like to invite you in just a moment. And I know it's difficult because it's like, what word do you have for the entire suffering world? But I'd like to challenge you to do that anyway. But I want to mention and share with you, I don't think we've ever reviewed this list together before, but you talk about speaking across cultures. When we started this podcast, Dr. Fred, you did it because, in part, you want to have a global impact. You want to have an impact on a global scale, as I've heard you say. And not only do we have listeners from the United States, Dr. Fred, but I'm going to read you a list of countries here where we have listeners. You ready?
Yeah.
All right, here we go. Canada, United Kingdom, Australia, India, Kenya, Germany, Estonia, Turkey, Brazil, France, Croatia, Netherlands, Hong Kong, Ireland, Italy, Malaysia, Norway, New Zealand, Belgium, Switzerland, Saudi Arabia, Argentina, Denmark, Finland, Philippines, Romania, Sweden, Algeria, Spain, Greece, Hungary, Israel, Isle of Man, Poland, Serbia, Russia, and parts unknown.
Really? These are bona fide listeners of this particular podcast.
Those are all countries where we've had downloads of the podcast.
Awesome.
Yeah.
That's incredible.
Yeah. So what do you, this global audience that's right here listening right now, whatever they're struggling with, what do you have to say to them, Dr. Fred?
I think today the thing I have to say is start with what's so. Get where you are, like really move the emotions out, like really get to where you really are right now. Get to where you really are. Get a sense of exactly what is so, not what happened back then to get you here necessarily, and really not what's right in front of you that you now need to do, but just really get clear about what's going on right this very minute. To use what is an oft-used, maybe overused analogy here, GPS has no chance of getting you where you want to go if it doesn't know where you are. So this idea of really getting what is so in life right now, and gosh, if any of the things we talked about, any of the atrocities, if this is what's going on for you, my heart really does bleed. It's not, most of those things are not going on for me individually. And I, in my own self, would declare myself living at times in a state of sheer misery. And I live in sheer misery because those things are going on in the world. And it isn't like I would want them to go on with me. It's just that they're here. So when these things are going on, whatever their, whatever harshness, there tends to be some beautiful things going on elsewhere in one's life, whether it be with the family or with the pets or with your home or with your countrymen or your friends or whatever work you just did or whatever art project you're working on through your own creativity, that there does tend to be beauty, even if it's the sunset this morning, or the sunrise this morning, or the sunset tonight. There's something about getting what's so and starting from there and getting there is, how about if we just consider the possibility that there's nothing wrong with you? How about if we just consider there's a possibility here that there's nothing wrong with you? We don't have to blame the log for burning when it's in a fire. We don't have to blame that log. We don't have to blame you at all for having something wrong with you, for having difficulty dealing with the world around you. We are having difficulty dealing with the world around us, each and every one of us. And it's long before, March of 2020. That's just a high profile hit. We're not just talking about that. We're talking about it takes something to get wrapped around, to embrace the world around us. When we start seeing that your particular experience or our particular experience is just that, it's our particular experience that can leave us disarmed or leave us helpless or leave us terrified, the possibility it gets right from there that there are things that can be done or said or explored or sought after that come from what's really so, that might be able to plug some of those holes or make a difference for yourself or others or have usefulness be interjected in an area of life that you had already given up on. So there's something, again, about just starting with what's so. Gosh, if I could say, I don't want to say it dismissively, but it sure does seem like Welcome to Humanity fits here. It's sort of like, here's a big hug for you, and will you hold my hand, and can we do this together? And there's a lot of pain in the world, and there's just something like, what's more worthwhile than, can we do this together? And I forget it too, of course. I'm just triggered like every other human. And so thank you for listening too. And there's something like, can we do this together? What can I do for you? What can I do with you? What can I hear from you? What can I offer you? What can I learn from you? What, in reverse, what, in the other direction as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's really beautiful, Dr. Fred. I so appreciate your spirit, appreciate your heart, and appreciate your stand for humanity and for the goodness that is within everyone. Thanks for taking the time to have this conversation with me today and to share it with our listeners. It's always a pleasure.
Yeah, it's been great. Thanks for being the producer and my good friend. And our listeners should know how important you are to me and how you are, how important our conversations have been in creating this ethos. As you're listening for me has really created this. So Ryan might act like he doesn't know any of these answers before he asks them, but in truth, Ryan's asking these questions just so we can explore together what's on the edge of what it means to say, welcome to humanity. So thanks again, Ryan Levesque, for being right here with me.